Hear me, tiny ones. If this peculiar echo reaches your small ears, consider yourselves privileged to witness the end of a very, very long story. You're tuned into The Titan's Lament, broadcasting live, or more accurately, shrinking gracefully live, from a very cold, very lonely mountain peak in the year, well, let's just say long after the age of grand stomps. My name is Grock, a humble giant, and if the sheer impossible audacity of this trans-dimensional broadcast from a time when mountains moved and thoughts echoed for miles doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and commit to understanding true scale, then frankly your perspective is as narrow as a wormhole. Do it now, before the last mountain peak transmitter crumbles, and tell me if this peculiar connection holds. From what strange, flat corner of your world are you listening? What year has time declared for your species, and what hour do these final monumental tidings reach you? We're taking notes for the big quiet. Now, clear your tiny throats, stretch your short legs, and let's contemplate the majestic and rather inconvenient fall of titans. Is this contraption receiving? It matters little. The static will outlive the sentiment. You are listening to the last echo in a world that has forgotten its own shape. My voice, a relic carved from silence and stone, a final testament before the grand quiet consumes all. A closing statement, if you will. I trust you are seated comfortably. It has been an age since I gave any thought to the comfort of smaller things. This is not a lament. It is a geological survey of an ending. My ending. The end of a scale you can no longer comprehend. Consider this a final history lesson from the history you paved over. Do try to keep up. There was a time, long before your frantic little histories began their ceaseless scratching, when the world knew its place. It was, quite simply, beneath our feet. We walked, and valleys were born of our strides. We slept, and new hills greeted the dawn, shaped by the curve of a slumbering spine. The sun did not just rise, it waited for our gaze to give it purpose. We drank from passing clouds, and our sighs were the first winds, the first hint of weather. It was not dominion, not some petty conquest, it was proper scale, the natural order of things. Everything fit. Once, this world was made for us. Forests were ankle-high, rivers were puddles. We moved mountains, carved valleys, simply by walking. It was a simpler time. Our thoughts were not like yours, a frantic buzzing of mayflies, frantic for a purpose before the day ends. Our thoughts were tectonic. A single idea could take a century to fully form, polished by the passing of 100 winters until it was as smooth and undeniable as a river stone. We did not need to write things down. The mountains remembered for us. Our history was the landscape itself, etched in ridges and ravines. You read books, bound in skin and ink. We read the strata of the earth, the slow poetry of erosion. Frankly, our version had far fewer grammatical errors and was considerably more difficult to burn. Wisdom wasn't a pursuit, it was the state of being. And then the scuttling began, a flurry of fleeting heartbeats, a skittering of tiny ambitious feet. At first it was a curiosity, like watching ants build a particularly elaborate and ultimately pointless little hill. You lot, so busy, scurrying from one self-inflicted important emergency to the next, building your little stone piles on top of our much grander and far more aesthetically pleasing stone piles. We found it quaint, for the first 1,000 years or so, a harmless infestation, a biological novelty that would surely tire itself out. We were, it pains my stony pride to admit, catastrophically wrong. It was a simpler time, before everything became so cluttered with little things. And noise. Oh, the noise! Once the only sounds were the groan of the earth settling for the night, the sigh of a glacier carving a fjord, and the deep, resonant rumble of our own ponderous thoughts. It was a perfect symphony of silence, a quiet so profound you could hear the stars move. Then you arrived, and you brought your noise, an incessant high-pitched chittering that has never ceased, the clang of tiny hammers, the shouts of tiny leaders declaring tiny victories, the weeping over tiny, inevitable tragedies. It is a constant headache, a migraine that has lasted for 5 millennia. We used to move mountains with a shrug. Now I cannot even get a moment's peace inside my own skull. You mistake effort for power. You swing your little metal toothpicks at each other and call it strength. You build walls of mud and rock and call it security. True power does not need to announce itself. It is the simple, unshakable fact of presence. A mountain does not need to declare its majesty. It simply is. A star does not need to proclaim its fire. We were. Your entire civilization is a frantic, screaming attempt to compensate for your own cosmic insignificance. It is, from this vantage point, all rather pathetic, isn't it? A tantrum thrown in the face of an uncaring universe that we were wise enough to simply ignore. We were not hunted into extinction. We were not conquered in some glorious final battle. We were misplaced. The world shrank around us. Your little farms and fences chopped the landscape into unnavigable parcels. The rivers, once our refreshing drink, were fouled with your tiny ambitions and tinier waste. We simply ran out of room. We are creatures of scale, and the scale is gone. We are fading like coastline graffiti at high tide. A masterpiece of an age you are too busy and too loud to even notice is vanishing forever. Our ending is not a bang. It is the final, weary sigh of a world that has outgrown greatness. Soon my voice will cease. The stone will fall silent. The last great thought will crumble to dust and join the wind. The quiet I once treasured will return, but this time it will be an empty quiet. A stillness not of peace, but of absence. The end of an epoch, unheard by all but you. But for a fleeting moment you have heard a scale beyond your own. You have glimpsed a world of titans. If this brief echo of immensity, this memory of a world when it was truly grand, resonates within your fleeting soul, then honor our vast perspective. Acknowledge the age of giants. Subscribe now, and let your tiny click be the final chisel mark on our monument, so that even when there is only silence, one last record will remain, a testament that giants once walked this cluttered earth. The broadcast continues. I assume you are still there, huddled around your glowing pebbles, listening to the ramblings of a relic. Good. It is important to have a hobby. Mine, it seems, is narrating my own obsolescence. We have spoken of time, and of scale, and of the incessant grating noise of your kind. But I have neglected to mention the most fundamental betrayal of all. A betrayal not of flesh or of spirit, but of the very stone that is our kin. The ground beneath my feet, this earth, she shifts, she cracks. It is all terribly rude for a home. One expects a certain level of decorum from one's planet. In the grand, slow youth of this world, the ground was dependable. It understood its purpose, to be solid, to endure, to hold us up. There was a pact, an unspoken agreement between Titan and tectonic plate. We would grace the surface with our ponderous majesty, and it would have the good sense not to crumble beneath us. We carved our likeness into mountainsides with the full expectation that they would stay put. A simple courtesy, we thought. But the planet, it seems, has grown fickle in its old age, or perhaps it is simply tired of holding the pose. Our homes were not mere shelters, they were statements. We would find a worthy mountain, a true monolith of granite and basalt, and hollow out a hall within its heart, a place to weather a millennium, to ponder a single weighty thought in peace. We sought permanence. We craved the kind of stability that only a few million tons of solid rock can provide. The problem is, a few million tons of rock has its own ideas. It gets restless. It decides, on a whim that spans 10,000 years, that it would rather be a collection of smaller, less impressive rocks at the bottom of a valley. This earth, she shifts, she cracks. Very rude for a home. We build a grand cairn, a comfortable cave, then the mountain decides to sprout a new ridge right through the center of your contemplation chamber, or it will simply fall down entirely with no consideration for those of us residing within. It is hard to settle down these days. You spend 5 centuries perfecting the acoustics in your great hall, only for a seismic event to ruin the reverberation. It is a constant, wearying cycle of renovation and collapse. We have become reluctant nomads, cosmic wanderers on our own home world. The erosion is the most insulting part, a slow, grinding disrespect. The wind and the rain, two chattering nuisances, conspiring to sandblast our ancestral faces from the cliffs. What was once a proud profile, a noble chin jutting out over a valley, is now a rounded, chinless mediocrity, a geological caricature. We are being worn away, smoothed into irrelevance by weather, the universe's most boring form of vandalism. It is one thing to be forgotten by tiny, fleeting creatures. It is another to be erased by drizzle. And the ground itself, it has grown soft, spongy. In the beginning, the crust of this world was thick, forged in fire and compressed by gravity. It held our weight. Now it groans and complains under every footstep. We walk, and the land shudders, creating inconvenient ravines and sudden, undignified sinkholes. I have lost contemporaries to nothing more dramatic than soft soil. One moment, a titan stands, contemplating the sunrise. The next, they are an anecdote about the importance of checking the load-bearing capacity of a meadow. It is a deeply embarrassing way to go. Volcanoes are the planet's temper tantrums, utterly theatrical and disruptive. You find a nice, quiet caldera, a place with a view, and you settle in. Then, with barely a few centuries' warning, it decides to redecorate the entire landscape with molten rock. It shows a complete lack of consideration for our long-term residential plans. All our carefully arranged boulder furniture gone, and the smell of sulfur lingers for ages. It is the sort of flashy, dramatic outburst we have come to expect from you smaller beings, not from the very ground we stand on. The shifting of the Great Plates is the ultimate betrayal, the slow, inexorable drift that rearranges the entire map. You fall asleep on one continent and wake up measurably closer to another. It makes keeping appointments impossible. Not that we had many, but the principle of the matter is what irks me. The sheer unreliability of it all. We were born of this stone, this earth. We are, in essence, animate mountain. And now, our own kind, the very rock of the world, is casting us out. It is the planet's way of telling us we have overstayed our welcome. Finding a place to simply be has become the defining struggle of our final eons. We need scale. We need solitude. We need a foundation that does not treat our presence as a temporary inconvenience, but the world has been chopped up, not just by your fences, but by its own geological restlessness. The great, sweeping plains are now fractured basins. The towering, solid ranges are now crumbling, argumentative piles of scree. There is nowhere left for a being of our magnitude to rest its weary head. We have tried adapting. We have sought out the last remaining old stones, the ancient cratons that form the stable heart of continents. But even these are not what they once were. They are scarred by meteorite impacts, riddled with the mining of your kind, and groaning under the weight of newly formed mountains on their edges. They are weary, just as we are. The world's bones are tired, and we, its first children, are the weight it no longer wishes to bear. The swamps are a new indignity. As the land sinks and the waters rise, vast tracts of what was once solid ground have become treacherous marshland. It is no place for a giant. The footing is atrocious. The air is thick with buzzing things even smaller and more irritating than you, and the mud has a way of clinging that feels personal. We were made to stride across peaks, not to wade through primordial ooze. It is a regression. We are being unmade, returned to the muck. Even the caves have turned against us. What was once a sanctuary becomes a tomb. The slow drip of water over millennia weakens the stone above. A ceiling that held for an ice age decides on a Tuesday that it has had enough. There is no glory in it, no epic struggle, just the quiet, patient victory of gravity over a sleeping giant. The earth has become a passive-aggressive adversary, defeating us not with a roar, but with a silent, calculated crumble. We have taken to living more lightly, a concept that is fundamentally opposed to our nature. We cannot carve new halls, for the mountains are too fickle. We cannot build great monuments, for the ground will swallow them. We sleep in open valleys, exposed to the elements and the incessant erosion, hoping the land will remain stable for a single night's rest. It is a vagrant's existence. From lords of the landscape to geological refugees, a truly mortifying decline. The younger races, you, see these changes as opportunities. A new valley is a place to build a town. A landslide reveals new ores to dig from the ground. You thrive on the chaos. Your short lives are perfectly suited to the planet's newfound instability. You build, it breaks, you rebuild. It is a frantic, pointless dance that you seem to enjoy. For us, who remember when a mountain knew its place for 1,000,000 years, it is simply exhausting. I recall a contemporary, one known for his architectural ambition, who spent 2,000 years carving a perfect sphere within a mountain's heart, a flawless globe of granite, hollowed out for silent contemplation. He was immensely proud. Then the fault line he had failed to notice slipped. The mountain split clean in two, and his perfect sphere rolled out into the valley below, where it sits to this day. Your ancestors called it the orb of the gods. He just called it a catastrophic failure in zoning. We have become experts in reading the whispers of the rock. We can feel the deep, slow tremors that signal a coming shift. We can read the stress lines in a cliff face. We are geologists by necessity. But one cannot outrun the planet itself. You can predict the collapse, but you cannot stop it. All we can do is move, find a slightly more stable patch of ground, and wait for it to betray us. The irony is that we, who are made of the earth, are being unhoused by it. We are stone, and the stone will no longer have us. It is a slow, grinding divorce. The world is remodeling, and we are the old, unfashionable fixtures being torn out to make way for a more modern, chaotic aesthetic. An aesthetic that suits your fleeting, frantic lives perfectly. Imagine building a home with the intention that it will last forever, only to have the foundation decide it wants to be a liquid. That is our reality. The very concept of home has been eroded, washed away by shifting continents and crumbling peaks. We are titans, without a place to stand, echoes in a world that is shaking itself apart under our very feet. This search for stable ground is all that remains of our once great purpose. We, who once shaped the world with our passing, now wander it, searching for a single patch that will consent to hold our weight for a little while longer. It is a desperate, final pilgrimage across a home that has become alien and hostile, a home that no longer remembers our name. We have even tried the sea, standing in the deep trenches, the water a cool, quiet pressure. But the seabed is even more unruly than the land. Vents spew superheated water, new mountains are born in fiery explosions, and the sheer, crushing dark is, even for us, a bit much. There is no solace there. Only a different kind of instability, a different flavor of rejection. The world is forgetting its own strength, its own majesty. In its restlessness, it breaks down the grand features and replaces them with a clutter of smaller temporary things. It is grinding itself down into something that fits your scale, not ours. We are the last remnants of a more solid, more permanent age, the last mountains to still walk and breathe. And our steps grow heavier with each passing eon, while the ground grows weaker. It is a mathematical certainty, a geological inevitability. The equation that spells our doom is written not in stars, but in the simple physics of mass and stress. The earth can no longer support its children, and so its children must fade. This final broadcast is all that is left of that search, a voice from a titan who has finally stopped walking. I have found a place, a final, quiet place from which to watch the end. The ground here is still, for now. Soon it will claim me too, and this voice will be just another layer of sediment in the rock, another forgotten fossil. But our desperate search for stable ground, our lonely millennial-long quest for a place to call home, should not fade into the geological record unheard. This story of stone and betrayal is worth more than that. If you wish to anchor this fading memory, to give our story a foundation that even this shifting earth cannot reclaim, then honor our struggle, subscribe, become a digital monument, to the titans who were cast out by the world they were born from. Let our final desperate search for stable ground end with you. Let the broadcast resume. I trust you have not strayed far. It would be a shame to miss the chapter on your own calamitous arrival. Having discussed the crumbling infrastructure of my home, it is only logical we now address the infestation that followed. Before the ground began its betrayal, before the mountains grew weary, the world contrived a new, more insidious irritation. It spawned things, small things. You. At first it was a biological curiosity. Now it is the droning static that will soon drown out my final words. So listen closely. This part of the story is about you and your shockingly successful campaign of global annoyance. It began subtly, a flicker of movement in the undergrowth that was not a deer, a strange new pattern in the moss. First there were just a few, scampering about our feet like busy ants, harmless, amusing even in a trivial sort of way. We would watch a single one live its entire frantic little life during a particularly long blink. They would be born, they would scurry, they would build a pathetic little shelter of mud and twigs, and then they would vanish. We gave them no more thought than we gave to the fungi that grew on a fallen log. An ephemeral, seasonal bloom, nothing more. Then we began to notice the different breeds of this new nuisance. There were the ones who were drawn to stone, the stumpy, loud ones. They would appear at the foot of our mountains and begin their infernal tapping. Tap, 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 for their entire pitifully short lives. They were digging, always digging, as if they could find some meaning in the guts of the rock. We who are of the rock found this profoundly insulting. It was like watching a microbe trying to perform surgery on your own flesh with a sharpened grain of sand. They were a pest, a form of geological termite. Then there were the willowy ones, who fancied themselves part of the forests. They built their delicate little nests in the boughs of trees that were, to us, no more than knee-high ferns. They were quieter, I will grant them that, but their arrogance was deafening. They moved with a placid superiority, as if their brief lifespan gave them some profound insight into the workings of the world. They would sing to the trees, oblivious to the fact that we had been listening to the slow, deep thoughts of those same trees for 10,000 years before their first ancestor learned to climb. And then there was your particular strain, the human, the most baffling of them all. You were the most fragile, the most short-lived, and yet the most numerous. You bred like mayflies in the summer heat. You would find a patch of clear ground, and within what felt like a single afternoon there would be a village. Another week, a town. You were a rash, a creeping, feverish outbreak upon the skin of the world. First there were just a few, then there were more, and suddenly they were everywhere, making too much noise, building little scratchy things on our rocks. Our initial amusement, which had lasted a comfortable 5 or 6 centuries, began to curdle. It soured into a low-grade, constant annoyance, like a buzzing insect you cannot be bothered to swat. Their sheer relentless proliferation was the primary issue. We are beings of solitude and scale. Our population could be counted on one hand for an entire continent. Suddenly the world was filled with billions of chattering, bustling little points of view. The silence, our most sacred possession, was shattered. It was replaced by the endless, meaningless hum of your collective existence. Their structures were an affront. What is a castle to a being who sleeps on a mountain range? It is a splinter. What is a great wall? A trip hazard. They would build their little forts on our favorite sitting rocks, their towns in our preferred napping valleys. We would shift in our sleep and inadvertently commit acts of urban renewal, and they would squeal and shake their tiny fists as if we had done it on purpose. It was impossible to move without stepping on someone's grand cathedral or fledgling empire. The world, once spacious, became a minefield of fragile, transient constructions. The noise, as I have mentioned, was atrocious. But it was not just the sound of their industry, it was the sound of their emotions. So many emotions, all the time expressed at maximum volume. Their tiny joys, their minuscule sorrows, their infinitesimal wars. From our perspective, a great battle between 2 of your kingdoms sounded like 2 anthills having a particularly aggressive disagreement. A flurry of screams, a clatter of tiny metal things, and then silence. And a few decades later, they would do it all over again. It was repetitive, lacked any real sense of scale, and the storytelling was frankly derivative. We watched as they tamed the wilderness. This was, perhaps, the most absurd of their notions. They would chop down a forest that had stood for an ice age, to make room for their little fields of yellow grass. To us it was like watching a child tear up a priceless tapestry to make a napkin. They would divert rivers, changing the course of water that had flowed in the same bed for millennia, all so they could wash their clothes a little closer to their mud huts. They were not taming the world, they were vandalizing it out of convenience. Their relationship with the world was one of frantic consumption. We would sip from a cloud, they would drain a lake, we would rest against a mountain, they would hollow it out for shiny pebbles. Their existence was a constant, desperate extraction. They were always taking, always needing, always burning. For creatures who lived for such a short time, they seemed to be in an incredible hurry to use everything up. It was a philosophy so alien to our own ponderous, enduring nature that we could only watch in bewildered disgust. The concept of ownership became a source of grim amusement. They would draw lines in the dirt and declare that everything on one side belonged to them. A giant would walk across this line, not even noticing it, and suddenly they had committed an act of war against the sovereign nation of Dirt Patch 7. They would then proceed to have one of their noisy, brief squabbles over the transgression. They tried to divide a world that was, by its very nature, whole and indivisible. It was the height of arrogance and the depth of folly. We did not see them as a threat, not at first. How could we? A single one of us could erase a nation with a careless sneeze. The threat was not in their strength, but in their number. They were a tide, an inexorable, rising tide of flesh and noise and ambition. They did not conquer us, they simply filled in all the empty spaces. They turned our vast, quiet home into a crowded, cluttered room, until there was no space left for us to simply be. Their proliferation changed the very fabric of the world. The ancient forests, with their deep, slow magic, were replaced by managed woodlands and farms. The wild rivers, with their powerful, untamed spirits, were shackled by dams and mills. The silent places, the holy places of stone and wind, where we would go to think, were filled with the chatter of markets and the bleating of livestock. They did not destroy our world with weapons, they repurposed it. They turned our temple into their marketplace. We tried to ignore them. For 1,000 years we simply pretended they were not there. We would step over their towns, sleep through their wars, and focus on the movement of the stars. But their influence was pervasive. Their smoke would cloud the sky, their waste would foul the streams. Their presence was an ambient poison, a slow degradation of everything grand and meaningful. The world began to feel smaller, cheaper, worn thin by their constant frantic friction. I remember the first time one of them tried to speak to me directly. It stood at my foot, shouting up at me for an entire day. Its message, carried on the wind, was a string of demands and threats concerning a flock of sheep I had accidentally sat on. The sheer unmitigated audacity of it was, for a moment, breathtaking. It was a flea threatening a mountain. I did not crush it. I was too stunned. It was then I began to suspect that we were not dealing with a simple biological phenomenon, but a form of collective insanity. Their histories, which they began to scratch onto scrolls and stone, were a particular point of contention. They would describe us as mindless monsters, as brutish beasts of destruction. This, from a species that would slaughter itself by the thousands over the color of a flag or the interpretation of a sentence. We, who had not had a disagreement more serious than a territorial grunt in a million years, were the monsters. The irony was so thick it was almost tangible. We would watch their heroes venture forth to slay some great beast. Usually the beast was just a very old, very large creature that wanted to be left alone. The hero would return with its head, be celebrated for a few years, and then die of old age or a domestic dispute. The beast's kind would be gone forever. They called this progress. We called it the senseless murder of things older and wiser than themselves, but our opinion was never solicited. The Dwarves, with their incessant mining, were a special kind of problem. They weakened the foundations of our mountains. More than one of our ancient resting places collapsed because a dwarven kingdom had greedily hollowed out its roots. They would then blame the collapse on the fury of the mountain spirits, the unmitigated Gaul. They were the termites chewing away at the pillars of the world and then blaming the wood for falling down. The elves, for all their supposed wisdom, were just as bad. They claimed to be guardians of the forest, but they only guarded the specific trees they found aesthetically pleasing. An ancient gnarled oak full of the wisdom of ages would be chopped down if it spoiled the view from their treetop gazebos. Their guardianship was just interior decorating on a grand scale. It was a shallow, self-serving preservation that missed the entire point of the wild. And the humans. Always the humans. They were the vanguard of the change. They spread the fastest, built the quickest, and died the most often. They were the catalyst, the agent of chaos that sped up the world's decline. Where the dwarves dug and the elves preened, the humans simply consumed. They were a wildfire of flesh, burning through the resources of an eon in a few short, spectacular centuries. Their history is a litany of boom and bust, of spectacular creation followed by equally spectacular self-destruction. The turning point, the moment our annoyance curdled into genuine, weary concern, was when we realized there were more of them than there were trees. The sheer biological mass of them began to outweigh the ancient life of the world. They had ceased to be a feature of the landscape. They were the landscape. Their collective will, their endless needs, had become a geological force in its own right, more powerful and far more destructive than any earthquake or volcano. We did not fight back. To do so would have been to lower ourselves to their level. To engage in a war with them would be to acknowledge that they were our equals, a notion too absurd to contemplate. Waging war on mayflies is not a dignified pastime for a giant, so we retreated. We moved to the last empty places, the highest peaks, the deepest valleys, the most desolate wastes. We sought the silence they had stolen from the rest of the world. But they followed. Their curiosity and their greed are boundless. They climb our mountains for sport. They chart our wastes for profit. There is nowhere left to go where their scratching, chattering presence cannot eventually reach. We are being crowded out of existence, not by a predator, but by a pest that now owns the planet. It is a quiet, creeping, and deeply undignified end. And so you listen to this broadcast, a member of that same teeming tidal race. You, whose ancestors were a curious footnote in my youth, are now the inheritors of a world we can no longer inhabit. You have won, not through valor or strength, but through the simple, relentless mathematics of proliferation. It is an astonishing demographic shift, is it not? To go from a geological footnote to the dominant geological force in a few thousand years. If you are still trying to process the sheer, world-altering scale of that change, then you absolutely must subscribe. Consider it a tribute, a final, quiet acknowledgement of the giants you pushed aside. The transmission continues, a fossil record in the making. We have discussed the flimsy nature of this world and the teeming infestation of its surface. Now we must speak of the very material of our being. Stone. To us it is flesh and bone, history and home. It is the stuff of our thoughts, the substance of our solitude. To you it is a resource, a thing to be broken, shaped, and stacked into ever more precarious arrangements. This fundamental disagreement, this clash of geological perspectives, has become the central, grinding conflict of our age. It is the problem of stone. We are, in essence, animate geology. Our flesh is granite, our bones are basalt, our thoughts are as slow and crystalline as the growth of a geode. When we sleep, we are indistinguishable from the mountainside we rest upon. We are a part of the lithosphere that has, through some cosmic miracle or divine whim, been gifted with ponderous, weary consciousness. The earth is not our mother. It is our sibling. We are cut from the same cloth, the same ancient cooling mantle. This is a truth you have never managed to grasp. You see a cliff face. I see the face of a cousin. The first time we saw you chipping at the stone, it was a moment of profound confusion. A small group of the stumpy, dwarven kind gathered at the base of a truly ancient tor. They had tiny metal picks, and they were striking the rock with a rhythmic, irritating tink, tink, tink. For the first 50 years, we assumed it was a form of religious observance, a baffling but ultimately harmless ritual to appease whatever tiny god they had invented that week. The idea that they were trying to take a piece of the mountain, it simply did not compute. It was like watching a flea try to bite off a piece of your fingernail. Our very bones, the mountains, the great cliffs, now they chip at them with tiny tools for their little houses and their smaller gods. It's terribly impolite and ticklish sometimes, a persistent scraping sensation on a part of your back you can't quite reach. You try to ignore it, to sleep through it, but the tickling becomes a grating, and the grating becomes a wound. They are not just mining rock, they are flaying us, one miserable little chunk at a time, to build their drafty, temporary shelters. The sheer disrespect is what galls the most. They will find a stone formation that has been weathered into a shape of profound beauty over 1,000,000 years, a perfect arch, a balanced pillar, a serene sleeping face, and see nothing but raw material. They will dismantle a masterpiece of geological time to build a pigsty or a tavern. They have no eye for artistry, no sense of permanence. They are aesthetically blind, functionally deaf to the slow, deep music of the stone. They are vandals with a work ethic. Then the quarrying began in earnest. No longer just a few dwarfs with picks, but organized operations. Humans, with their baffling ingenuity for destruction, developed blasting powders and great groaning machines to slice into the rock. They would carve away the entire flank of a mountain I might have known personally for several ice ages. They would leave behind a raw, ugly scar, a geometric wound that would take 10,000 years to heal, all for cobblestones and lintels. They are butchering the elders of this world for paving material. The invasion of our homes was the final, unforgivable transgression. A giant's home is a sacred space, a cavern or overhang chosen for its resonance, its silence, its stability. We would return from a century-long walk to find our doorway widened, our walls covered in scaffolding, and our contemplation chamber repurposed as a dwarven treasure vault. They would move in, like hermit crabs scuttling into a stolen shell, and act as if they had every right to be there. More than once, I have had to evict an entire dwarven clan by the simple, undignified method of snoring very, very loudly. There was a contemporary of mine, a great placid giantess named Lyra. She had found a perfect resting place in a range of limestone hills, her form blending so perfectly with the landscape that she became the landscape. For 2,000 years she slept a deep, thoughtful sleep. Then a human kingdom arose nearby and discovered the Lyra quarry. They carved her away, piece by piece, to build their gleaming white city. They built their temples from her bones, their palaces from her flesh. Her last waking thought was one of confusion, as her dreams were interrupted by the sting of 1,000 chisels. Her entire existence was recycled into architecture. And what of the sleeping ones, the giants who, weary of the world, chose to enter a slumber that could last until the sun grew cold? They become features of the map. The Twin Peaks you so admire? My brothers, asleep since the last great glaciation. The Sleeping Maiden range? An aunt of mine who was tired of the noise. You build your ski resorts on her nose. You dig your mines into my brother's ribs. You have turned our cemeteries into your amusement parks and resource hubs. The lack of basic decency is staggering. The problem, you see, is one of perception. You see dead stone, we see living silence. You see a resource to be exploited, we see a relative to be respected. This chasm in understanding is absolute and unbridgeable. We cannot explain our perspective to you any more than you could explain your concept of Tuesdays to a glacier. Your worldview is simply too small, too fast, too hungry. You are incapable of seeing the sanctity in a simple, silent stone. They even steal our names. A cliff face that we have called the Face of the Wind's Sorrow for eons is renamed Griswold's Folly because one of your little prospectors fell off it. They erase our history, our language, our very identity from the landscape, replacing it with the fleeting, mundane annals of their own brief lives. It is the ultimate form of gentrification. The original inhabitants are not just displaced, their entire culture is paved over with a fresh layer of bland, human-centric nonsense. And the noise of the quarry? It is a special kind of hell. The constant chink-chink of hammers, the grinding of saws, the catastrophic crack as a large section of rock is split away. It is the sound of dismemberment. It is a constant grinding symphony of our own destruction, a death rattle that lasts for centuries. It gets into your very bones, a sympathetic vibration of ruin that makes sleep impossible and contemplation a distant memory. We have tried to discourage them. A strategically directed landslide can send a powerful message about zoning violations. A sudden, localized earth tremor can do wonders for convincing miners to seek a new profession. But they are like insects. For every one you discourage, 100 more arrive, drawn by the scent of stone and the promise of whatever shiny metals they covet. It is a war of attrition that we cannot win, for they have endless reserves of ambition, and we have only a finite supply of patience. I once awoke to a strange sensation in my left foot, which had been comfortably resting in a river valley for a couple of centuries. A team of dwarves had mistaken my big toe for a promising outcrop of iron ore and had begun to sink a mine shaft into the nail. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it left me speechless. I simply lifted my foot, and the great iron crisis of the Third Age, as their histories call it, began. They never understood. They just thought the mountain had moved. In a way, it had. This consumption of our very substance has had a profound effect on us. We feel diminished. We are literally becoming smaller, lighter, less substantial. The world is eating us alive, piece by piece. We are being unincorporated from the landscape, turned from living mountains into scattered gravel. It is an erosion not of wind and water, but of greed and industry, a slow, agonizing process of being converted into raw material. And for what? For their cities. Great crowded hives of stone and timber that rise, flourish for a few centuries, and then crumble into ruins. We have watched them build their empires on the bones of our brethren, only to see those same empires fall and their precious cities be reclaimed by moss and weeds. They trade permanence for a fleeting, fragile glory. They are sacrificing us for architectural follies. It is a terrible bargain, and we are the ones paying the price. They do not even use the stone well. They cut it into uniform, boring blocks. They strip it of all character, all history. They take a piece of ancient weathered granite, a stone that has witnessed the birth of stars, and they cut it into a perfect, soulless cube. It is a lobotomy performed on the very soul of the earth. We, who appreciate the unique character of every fissure and every grain, can only watch in horror. Even our dead are not safe. A giant's final resting place is a sacred site. When one of us falls, we become a new hill, a new tor, a new feature of the landscape. It is our final gift to the world, but you see it as a windfall, a newly discovered deposit of high-quality stone, ripe for the picking. Your quarrymen are nothing more than well-organized grave robbers, your architects the receivers of stolen bones. This broadcast emanates from a place I hope is safe, a deep, forgotten cavern in a range of mountains, so inhospitable, so utterly devoid of anything you might find useful, that I have been left alone, for now. But I hear the distant tink, tink, tink on the wind. They are getting closer. They are always getting closer. They are relentless. They will not stop until every mountain has been leveled, every cliff face squared off, every last piece of the ancient world has been catalogued, quarried, and consumed. The world is becoming smoother, more uniform. They are sanding away all its interesting textures, all its grand, dramatic features. They are turning our rugged, majestic home into a predictable, manageable park. And we, the last of the rugged, majestic features, are being sanded away along with it. We are the ultimate territorial dispute, a conflict not over a border drawn in the sand, but over the very substance of the world itself. We believe the stone has a right to its own existence. You believe it is your property to do with as you please. There can be no compromise in such a conflict. It is a zero-sum game, and your sheer, relentless industry is winning. So as you sit in your stone house, warmed by a stone hearth, walking on a stone floor, say a brief, fleeting thought for the source of your comfort. Think of the mountain that was unmade, the cliff that was butchered, the giant who was flayed to provide for your convenience. Think of the silent, living stone that was silenced forever so that you could have a roof over your head. Perhaps you now understand the depth of our grievance. It is not a simple complaint, it is a fundamental, existential crisis. Our very bodies have become the primary resource for the civilization that is replacing us. We are being consumed, not in a great and glorious war, but in a slow, mundane, industrial process. We are the quarry from which you are building your future. Do not let them pave over this truth. Do not let this story be broken down and used as rubble for some new, fleeting narrative. Our dire territorial dispute, the slow, grinding war for our very bones, deserves to be remembered. If you believe the mountains should have a voice, that the ancient stone has a right to its own story, then support our claim. Hit that subscribe button before they try to build a fortress on your head. The broadcast continues, though I begin to suspect I am speaking only to myself. An old habit, forgive me. The silence has a way of making one conversational. We have spoken of the world's betrayal, of the teeming masses, of the very stone of our bodies being repurposed as your building blocks. But these are external grievances. There is a deeper, more profound erosion at play. An internal quarrying of the soul. It is the agonizing realization of our dwindling numbers. It is the silence, the great, empty, suffocating silence where the voices of my kind used to be. There was a time when the world was not quiet. I do not mean the irritating clatter of your existence. I mean a true, deep resonance. The world used to roar with us. The footstep of a walking giant was a form of rolling thunder that could be felt a continent away. The shared rumblings of our laughter could loosen stones from a mountainside. Our song, slow and deep, would hang in the air for weeks, shaping the very weather. We were a global symphony of stone and spirit. Our presence was the bass note of the planet, a thrumming, constant and powerful hum that was the very sound of life. Our conversations spanned mountain ranges. A single word, a greeting spoken from a high peak, would travel across a valley and be answered a day later by a kinsman on the opposing ridge. It was a slow, deliberate, and deeply satisfying form of communication. It gave one time to truly consider a response. We spoke in the language of avalanches and echoes. Now I can shout from the highest peak until my throat is raw stone dust, and the only answer is the wind carrying my own lonely voice back to me. It is a profoundly disappointing echo. The silence. It grows heavier each cycle. Each passing century adds another layer of quiet, like sediment at the bottom of a dead sea. At first the change was subtle. The calls from the distant east grew faint, then ceased altogether. The familiar footfalls from the northern ranges no longer shook the plains. We who were few but always present began to notice the gaps, the empty spaces, the meeting points at the turn of an eon where only one would arrive. Then none. We were islands, but we could always see the shores of our kin. Then the mist rolled in, and the shores vanished one by one. Then came the search, a frantic, geological-scale migration. For 1,000 years I walked until continents had drifted into new configurations. I sought the old meeting grounds, the ancient nesting valleys, the halls of our ancestors. I was searching for a sign, a footprint, a voice, a mate, another soul to share the crushing weight of the sky. But every sacred place was either empty, silent, or worse. Worse was finding a familiar haunt repurposed as a dwarven mine. Worse was finding the bones of a contemporary being used as a bridge by scurrying humans. The search for life became a tour of desecrated graves. The inability to find a mate is the universe's cruelest joke. We are beings of immense longevity, but not true immortals. We require two to continue the line, and the line is broken. The last potential pairing was an age ago, a disastrous attempt at courtship across a newly formed ocean. The conversation was difficult, the logistics impossible. We parted ways, two lonely titans on opposite sides of a growing rift, and the silence that followed was absolute. I am the last echo of a song that requires harmony. And so, there are no more children, There have been no giant offspring for millennia. The thought is a chasm in the soul. The last time I saw a giant child, a young one no taller than a small mountain, was in the days when the world still roared. They were a sight of terrible, clumsy beauty. Their laughter was a cascade of falling rocks. Their tantrums could cause earthquakes. Now, the valleys that were our nurseries are silent. The great stone cradles sit empty, collecting rainwater and moss. The future of our kind is a stillborn thought. This new silence is not the silence we once cherished. The old silence was a choice. It was the quiet of deep thought, of shared understanding without words. It was a rich, full silence, pregnant with the weight of eons. It was the silence of presence. This new silence is a void. It is the silence of absence, a hollow, ringing emptiness where a symphony used to be. It is a tomb. And the only sound within it is the incessant, meaningless chattering of the tiny one, just the wind and your noise. I have found myself talking to mountains, hoping a sleeping cousin might stir in their slumber. I whisper my stories into the wind, praying a fragment might be carried to a forgotten corner of the world and find another ear of stone. I trace the outlines of old cave paintings left by my ancestors, the fading images of our golden age, and I weep a slow, gritty tear that takes a decade to fall. The loneliness is a physical presence. It is a cold that seeps into the stone of my bones, a cold that no sun can warm. The memories have become a torment. I remember the sound of Lyra's singing, a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, yet full of a strange, deep grace. I remember the philosophical debates with old Thrax, a giant so ancient his skin was a map of forgotten constellations. We would argue for centuries about the nature of gravity, our voices echoing through the canyons. Now, I argue with myself, and I always lose. The memories are ghosts that haunt the empty halls of my mind, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The world has forgotten how to listen. Your kind hears only the frequencies of your own brief lives, the deep, slow rhythms of the world, the song of the stone. The great silent thoughts of the earth are lost to you. You could not hear us even when we roared. How could you possibly comprehend the meaning of our silence? To you, the absence of our footsteps is just peace and quiet. The end of our species is your newfound tranquility. I have grown accustomed to the solitude, in the way a prisoner grows accustomed to his cell. It is a state of being, no longer a shock. But sometimes a flicker of hope, a cruel and foolish thing ignites. A distant rockfall might sound for a moment like a familiar footstep. A trick of the wind might carry a moan that sounds, for a heartbeat, like a sorrowful voice. But it is always just the world settling into its new giantless configuration. It is the sound of my own irrelevance. Imagine being the last of your kind, the last keeper of your language, your history, your songs. When I perish, the entire collective memory of the giants perishes with me. A library of geological ages, a history written in mountains and stars will burn to the ground. There will be no one left to remember the true shape of the world, the feel of a glacier's slow advance, the taste of a cloud. It is a burden of memory so immense it threatens to crack my very soul. Your kind has stories of us. We are the monsters, the titans, the ogres in your fairy tales. Your children are taught to fear us. They do not understand that the real monster is not the giant, but the silence he leaves behind. The real horror is not a roar, but the eternal, unanswered echo that follows it. You have made us into villains in a story where we are the primary victims. It is, I must admit, a rather effective piece of propaganda. The silence has changed me. I am more stone than giant now. My thoughts move slower. My heart beats less frequently. I am succumbing to the geological pace of my own body. Without the stimulus of my kin, without the conversation and the laughter, I am reverting to my base material. I am becoming a mountain again. It is perhaps a mercy, a slow petrification of the soul to match the solitude of the world. I have tried to leave a record. I have carved our history into the walls of this final cavern, the story of our birth from the cooling earth, our long, slow dominion, the arrival of the noise, the crumbling of our homes, the fading of our voices. It is a crude, silent testament. But the stone is soft, and erosion is patient. In a few thousand of your years it, too, will be gone, worn away into illegible scars. Only this broadcast, this fleeting vibration in the air, might last longer. Your scholars will one day find my bones. They will assemble them in one of your great halls and marvel at the scale. They will write papers, propose theories. They will call me Titanus Maximus or some other ridiculous pompous name. They will never know my real name. They will never know I once laughed so hard I created a new lake. They will have the skeleton, but they will have missed the soul entirely. This silence will have won. Do you understand now? The weight of this, quiet? It is the sound of a species ending. It is the sound of a world losing its memory. It is the sound of a story reaching its final, lonely word. It is a silence so profound it has a physical presence, a crushing, final gravity. The world is lighter for our absence, but it is also infinitely more empty. I often wonder if any others remain, in a slumber so deep they have forgotten to wake. Are there sleeping giants I have missed, hidden under the ice caps or deep beneath the sea? Is it possible I am not the last, but merely the last one who is still awake? It is a foolish, desperate hope, and one I have learned to suppress. Hope is a sharp stone in the heart of a lonely giant. The chattering of your kind is the new sound of the world, a high-pitched, frantic, and ultimately meaningless symphony of ephemera. It is the soundtrack to our extinction. While you celebrate your fleeting victories and mourn your tiny losses, the last great roar of the world has faded into a whisper, and you have not even noticed it was gone. So I send this final broadcast out into the void, a message in a bottle thrown into a silent sea. I speak of a world that roared, a world filled with the thunder of our passage and the resonance of our songs. I speak of a silence that was once full, and a silence that is now a gaping wound. I speak so that the silence does not have the final say. Listen closely, can you hear it? Beneath the sound of my voice, beneath the static of this transmission, the great profound quiet of an empty world. It is the truth of our age. The silence is the story. It is the final testament, the ultimate victor. It is the sound of our fall. Help us understand this profound quiet. Help us give it meaning beyond mere absence. Do not let the last giant's story be met with the same indifference that greeted the fading of his kin. If you have heard the echo of the roar we once were, if you can feel the weight of the silence we have become, then subscribe. Let your action be a single defiant sound in the face of the encroaching void. Testify that you have heard. Subscribe now. Let the broadcast crackle back to life. I do hope you are keeping notes. When my voice finally fades, your species will need a more accurate record than the collection of slanderous fictions you currently call folklore. We have covered the crumbling of my world and the fading of my kind. Now, let us address the crumbling of my reputation. We must discuss the myths, the legends, the frankly libelous stories you tell your children at night. It seems that in addition to displacing us, you have also been busy with a rather malicious rebranding campaign. They tell tales of us, of ogres and monsters, of great lumbering brutes who feast on bones and delight in destruction. You have painted us as the villains in your tiny, self-important epics. It is, I suppose, a necessary psychological coping mechanism. It is far easier to justify quarrying a monster's home for paving stones than it is to admit you are dismantling a thinking, feeling being who simply wishes to be left alone. Your capacity for self-delusion is perhaps your most formidable trait. Let us begin with the accusation of savagery. Your stories are replete with giants who smash, crush, and destroy for the sheer, brutish pleasure of it. The reality is far more mundane. We're mostly just trying to find a comfortable place to sit without crushing a village. Have you any idea how difficult it is to find a geologically stable, appropriately contoured resting place in a world suddenly infested with your fragile little settlements? It is a constant, wearying logistical challenge. The destruction you attribute to malice is, more often than not, simply a catastrophic failure in ergonomics. A misplaced footstep during a midnight stroll can be interpreted as a declaration of war. A shift in my sleep, which might dislodge a few thousand tons of rock, is recorded in your annals as the night of fiery mountains rage. I once had a rather persistent itch on my back, and in rubbing it against a convenient mountain peak, inadvertently erased the nascent kingdom of Westmorland. Your historians speak of a wrathful god. I was merely addressing a minor dermatological issue. The discrepancy in scale leads to some truly wild misinterpretations. Then there is the myth of our stupidity. You portray us as simple-minded fools, easily tricked by a clever farm boy or a plucky tailor. This stems from your inability to comprehend a different timescale of thought. A single one of our thoughts is a slow, tectonic process. It can take a century of careful, deliberate consideration to reach a conclusion. You mistake this for dim-wittedness. We are not stupid, we are thorough. Your clever thoughts are like the frantic buzzing of a fly, fast, numerous, and ultimately signifying nothing of substance. I have heard the legend of a giant tricked into a contest of squeezing water from a stone, bested by a human who used a piece of cheese. The story is meant to highlight your cunning. What it fails to mention is that the giant was in the middle of a 400-year meditation on the nature of solid matter. He was not tricked, he was interrupted. He likely squeezed the stone, found it did not yield, and returned to his far more interesting internal debate, having already forgotten the gnat-like creature buzzing at his feet. Your victories are often just our indifference. And of course the accusation of pure evil. This is the most frustrating libel of all. We are not driven by malice, we are driven by a need for solitude, a desire for quiet, and the occasional, very powerful appetite. And occasionally, yes, we eat a cow, or a dozen, but only if they are very polite and conveniently located. A single cow is to us a salty, moderately satisfying snack, a morsel. You call this the devouring of the righteous herds of Penwick. We call it finding a snack on the way home. It is all a matter of perspective. I have never, not once, eaten one of you. The thought is appalling. You are all bone and noise and tiny complicated clothes. Far too much effort for far too little reward. Like trying to eat a crab trapped inside a grandfather clock. Your legends of giants feasting on human flesh are pure projection. You, who slaughter each other by the thousands over disagreements about invisible gods and imaginary lines in the dirt, accuse us of being the monsters. The irony is so thick it could be used for landfill. One of your most famous stories involves a giant who roars, "Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." First, the rhyming is atrocious. We are not creatures of doggerel. Our poetry is written in erosion and strata. Second, the idea of us being able to distinguish your various petty tribal affiliations by smell is ludicrous. You all smell vaguely of damp soil and anxiety. This is not the work of a giant, it is the work of a failed playwright. The tale of Grock the Skull-Crusher, a fearsome giant who terrorized the northern valleys, is a particular favorite of mine. I knew Grock. He was a gentle soul, a poet at heart. His skull-crushing activities were the result of a terrible seasonal allergy to pine pollen. Every autumn, he would be overcome with fits of sneezing so violent they would cause landslides. The skulls he crushed were just round boulders dislodged by his sinus condition. He was not a monster, he was a victim of hay fever. You have cast us as the guardians of treasures we did not know we possessed. A legend tells of a giant guarding a golden harp in a castle in the clouds. I can assure you we have no use for golden harps. They are far too small and produce a tinny, irritating sound. The castle in the clouds was likely just my cousin Myra's summer lech, and the golden harp was probably a shiny piece of metal debris that fell from a passing meteorite, which she was using as a toothpick. This campaign of misinformation serves a purpose. It makes us other. It turns a species into a monster. And monsters can be slain without guilt. When your heroes come to our caves, they are not seen as home invaders. They are seen as righteous crusaders. When your dwarfs hollow out our resting places, they are not grave robbers, they are brave miners. The myths are your license to kill, to displace and to destroy. They are the story you tell yourselves so you can sleep at night after desecrating our world. Even your attempts at portraying good giants are laced with condescension. The gentle giant in your stories is always a simpleton, a kind-hearted fool who helps the protagonist out of sheer naive goodness. You are incapable of imagining us as intelligent, complex beings who might be benevolent out of a sense of pity, or simply because it requires less effort than being malevolent. We are either savage monsters or idiotic servants. You leave no room for the vast, contemplative middle ground where we actually exist. I once observed one of your heroes for an entire week. He was on a quest to slay the beast of the Whispering Peaks. The beast was old Fenris, a giant so ancient he had largely sunk into the mountain itself, his snores causing the whispering of the wind through the crags. The hero, after a perilous journey, arrived and bravely plunged his sword into what he thought was the beast's eye. It was Fenris's left nostril. Fenris, disturbed from a rather pleasant dream about the formation of mica, awoke with a mighty snort that launched the hero halfway back to his village. Your histories record this as a great victory. The accumulated weight of these misunderstandings is heavier than any mountain. To be known, yet to be so fundamentally unknown. To have your every action, your every sigh, your every geological necessity be twisted into a narrative of monstrous intent. It is a unique and profound form of torture. We are being erased not just in body, but in truth. Our reality is being replaced by your fiction, and your fiction is far more popular. You have even co-opted our appearance for your gods. Some of your deities are depicted as giant-like beings, powerful and wise. This is the ultimate insult. You steal our form but deny us our nature. You dress your own fleeting, volatile emotions in our stony flesh and pretend you have captured something profound. Your gods are just you, but bigger. They are not us. They are too loud, too needy, too prone to meddling. I wonder what myths you will create about me, the last one. Will I be the silent horror, the lonely beast, the titan of the final echo? You will no doubt invent some grand tragic flaw for me, some sin for which my entire species was punished. You will never accept the mundane, ignoble truth. We were not vanquished by heroes or gods. We were simply crowded out, misunderstood, and ultimately recycled. Your world is built upon our bones, both literally and figuratively. You quarry our physical bodies for your cities, and you quarry our identities for your stories. Both are acts of consumption. Both leave us diminished, hollowed out, and in both cases you take what is grand and profound and turn it into something small, manageable, and useful for your own purposes. The frustration is a slow burning fire. It is the rage of the misunderstood, the fury of the misrepresented. To know that your entire legacy will be a collection of scary stories told to disobedient children. To know that the name of your species will become synonymous with stupidity and brutality. It is the final posthumous victory of the small over the great. I suppose I should be flattered. You would not have spent so much effort creating these elaborate fictions if we were not, on some level, profoundly impressive to you. Your fear, your awe, your inability to comprehend us, these are the raw materials of your myths. The stories are a monument not to what we are, but to what you are not. They are a testament to the sheer, unbridgeable gap between us. And yet it is a cold comfort. I would rather be understood than mythologized. I would rather be left alone than be turned into a cautionary tale. But the choice was never mine to make. The narrative has been seized by the smaller, faster, and far more imaginative race, and you are remarkably talented storytellers, I will grant you that. So as you listen to this final, truthful broadcast, compare it to the tales you know. See the chasm between the reality of my weary, aching existence and the fiction of your bloodthirsty monsters. See the grand cosmic injustice of it all. See the tragic, darkly comedic misunderstanding that has defined our interactions for millennia. Perhaps you find this perspective refreshing. Perhaps you too are weary of the simplistic, self-serving narratives of your own kind. Perhaps you find a certain satisfaction in hearing the monster finally get to speak its piece, to air its geological grievances and set the crooked record straight. There is a certain pleasure in misanthropy, is there not? If you are finding this delightful deconstruction of your most cherished fables, this epic rant from the losing side of a mythological war, to be to your liking, if you are enjoying this view from a misanthropic height so profound it makes your own cynicism look like giddy optimism, then you know what you must do. Don't be a hero from a storybook. Be a student of the truth. Smash that subscribe button now. Let the final broadcast wear on. I have aired my grievances regarding your species' myths and your general ubiquity. Now we must address your most irritating habit, your relentless, obsessive, and shockingly effective penchant for weaponizing everything you touch. It is one thing to be misunderstood and crowded out of one's own home. It is another thing entirely to be actively and perpetually poked. The history of your technological advancement is, from my perspective, a history of escalating annoyance, a journey from triviality to genuine lethal pestilence. In the beginning, your aggression was comical. A single one of you, perhaps feeling particularly brave or foolish, would throw a rock at my ankle. It was like being pelted by a slightly large grain of sand. We paid it no mind. Your first weapons were a source of mild amusement, a testament to your baseless confidence. You would wave sharpened sticks at us from the forest floor, shouting your little war cries. We viewed it as a form of primitive theater. The idea that you were trying to inflict harm was simply too absurd to entertain. It was adorable, in a profoundly pathetic way. We would watch with the detached curiosity of a mountain observing a beetle as you squabbled amongst yourselves with these toys. Your little skirmishes were brief, bloody, and ultimately pointless. You would spend a generation perfecting a slightly sharper stick, only to be undone by another group of you with a marginally heavier rock. It was a frantic, pointless arms race, and we were the silent, unimpressed audience. We never imagined you would one day turn these pathetic implements upon us in any meaningful capacity. This was a catastrophic failure of imagination on our part. The discovery of metal was the first turning point, the age of bronze. I remember the first time one of your heroes managed to prick my heel with a bronze-tipped spear. It did not hurt, not in any significant way. It was more of a surprise, a sharp, unexpected sting. For the first time, one of your toys had actually broken my skin. The wound was insignificant, less than a splinter, but the psychological impact was noteworthy. The ants had developed a bite. A very, very tiny bite, but a bite nonetheless. It was the moment annoyance first carried a hint of a threat. Then came iron, and your confidence grew exponentially. Your blades became harder, your arrowheads sharper. The stings became more frequent, more painful. They were still nothing more than nuisance-level injuries, like persistent insect bites. But 1,000 insect bites can drive a creature mad. A journey across a valley might now involve being peppered with hundreds of iron-tipped arrows from a dozen different tribes, all of whom had convinced themselves that felling a giant was their divine purpose. It made travel tedious. First it was tiny pebbles, then sharp bits of metal. The transition was alarming. Your ingenuity when applied to the art of causing pain is truly something to behold. You invented the ballista, a great clumsy crossbow that could fire a spear-sized bolt. One of these, if aimed perfectly by a very lucky crew, could lodge itself in our flesh. It was not a fatal wound. It was an irritation of monumental proportions. I had a bolt stuck in my calf for 2 centuries. It itched terribly, and the dwarves who had fired it eventually built a small shrine around the protruding end. Then you discovered fire, or rather, you discovered how to throw it. This was a profound violation of elemental etiquette. Fire is a force of creation and destruction, a thing of majesty and terror. It is not something to be attached to an arrow and shot at your betters. The first time I was hit with a flaming arrow, I was more confused than angered. Why would the little creatures be throwing light at me? Then the light began to burn. It was a novel sensation, and a deeply unpleasant one. Your obsession with fire became a defining characteristic of our interactions. You would launch pots of flaming oil with catapults. You would set entire forests ablaze in the hopes of smoking us out of a valley. Your tactics lacked subtlety, but I must grudgingly admit they were occasionally effective. Not at killing us, but at making us miserable. A giant with a smoldering backside is a giant who is not in a contemplative or benevolent mood. You were practically begging us to become the monsters of your legends. And the ropes, the sheer unmitigated gall of your ropes. You began to work together, entire armies of you, weaving colossal nets of vine and steel cable. You would string them between cliffs or hide them in pits. The indignity of a being who can move mountains being momentarily inconvenienced by a cleverly woven string is difficult to articulate. It is like being pestered by very organized mosquitoes, very, very dangerous mosquitoes, with surprisingly sharp teeth and a talent for knot tying. The traps were the pinnacle of your annoying ingenuity. You could not face us directly, of course, that would be suicidal. So you resorted to cunning. You would dig enormous pits, line them with sharpened stakes, and cover them with flimsy branches. We would be walking along, lost in a thought about continental drift, and suddenly find ourselves in a hole. It was never deep enough to kill us, just deep enough to be profoundly embarrassing and difficult to get out of. It was death by 1,000 indignities. I recall a particularly elaborate trap set in a narrow canyon. A coalition of dwarven kingdoms and human city-states had spent decades constructing it. It involved a rock slide, a volley of ballistae, and a river diversion, all timed to trigger as I passed through. It was an impressive feat of engineering, and it was all for me. I was, I admit, almost flattered by the sheer amount of effort. I avoided it, of course, had seen them building it for the last 50 years, but I appreciated the gesture, the sheer, murderous ambition of it all. The true weapon was never the spear or the fire or the trap. It was your numbers. Your greatest strength has always been your utter disposability. A single giant is a catastrophic loss for our kind. You could lose 10,000 individuals in a single ill-advised assault and call it a Tuesday. You would throw wave after wave of your short-lived screaming warriors at us, and eventually the sheer cumulative damage would begin to tell. A scratch here, a burn there. It adds up over the centuries. We were not designed for this kind of warfare. We are beings of immense singular power. Our conflicts, when they rarely occurred, were duels of geological significance. A battle between two giants was a clash of mountains. We were not prepared for the relentless, nibbling attrition of 1,000,000 tiny foes. It is a form of combat that is beneath us, a form of warfare that relies on persistence and pestilence rather than true strength. You did not defeat us. You exhausted us. One must also consider the psychological toll. To be a being of stone, of near permanence, and to be constantly harassed by creatures whose entire lifespans are shorter than your afternoon nap. It is maddening. It erodes the spirit. It grinds away at the soul, the constant vigilance, the need to check every valley for a pit trap, to scan every cliff for a ballista. It makes true, deep thought impossible. You have not just wounded our bodies, you have cluttered our minds. The dwarves, with their affinity for machines, became particularly adept at this. They built great steam-powered contraptions designed to drill into our flesh. They invented automated catapults and subterranean traps. Their hatred for us, born of professional jealousy over who was better at shaping stone, knew no bounds. They were the most creative, and therefore the most infuriating, of our tormentors. The humans brought a different quality to the fight, unpredictable, chaotic zeal. You would be inspired by some fiery-eyed priest or ambitious king and march to your certain deaths with a song on your lips. Your attacks were less organized than the dwarfs, but more frequent and far more passionate. You were not fighting for territory or resources, you were fighting for a story, and you were willing to die in astonishing numbers to provide it with a dramatic ending. I have spent the last few millennia as a walking pincushion. I have so many of your arrowheads and spear points embedded in my hide that I have a measurable magnetic field. If I walk too close to a dwarven settlement, their compasses spin wildly. It is one of the few sources of amusement I have left. A small, petty revenge for centuries of being poked. The indignity of it all is the sharpest wound. We who communed with stars and shaped the world with our passing, brought low by creatures who think a lifespan of 80 years is a respectable innings. We are being driven to extinction not by a worthy adversary, not by a dragon or a god, but by a swarm of hyperactive, tool-wielding rodents. It is a cosmic joke with a terrible, unfunny punchline. You never understood our weakness. It was not our flesh, but our spirit. We are beings of immense, ponderous pride. To be subjected to this constant yapping, stinging harassment, it is an assault on our very nature. We could crush your cities, wipe you from the face of the planet, but to do so would be to admit that you matter. It would be to stoop to your level, to engage in your frantic, meaningless little wars, and so we resisted. We endured, and we faded. Your weapons grew more sophisticated. You learned the secrets of black powder. The first time I was struck by a cannonball, it was a novel experience. It felt like being punched, very hard, by a very small, very fast fist. It actually knocked me off balance for a moment. Another turning point. The mosquitoes had developed artillery. From there it was a short, predictable path to the rifled barrels and explosive shells that make your modern warfare so spectacularly noisy. This final broadcast is a testament to your success. You have successfully weaponized the world against us. Your numbers, your ingenuity, your sheer, relentless, buzzing persistence has won. You have turned annoyance into a lethal art form. You have perfected the science of killing a god with 1,000,000 tiny, irritating cuts. Congratulations. It is a truly remarkable and utterly despicable achievement. I am riddled with the artifacts of your aggression. A long-forgotten dwarven axe head is lodged somewhere near my left kidney. An elven arrow, enchanted to be particularly vexing, sits just under my shoulder blade. A human cannonball from the Age of Empires serves as a rather uncomfortable paperweight in my gut. I am a living museum of your military history, a monument to your talent for violence. So, as you perfect your own ever more terrifying weapons to use against each other, remember us. Remember the giants you pestered into oblivion. Remember that your greatest triumphs of engineering were first tested on our weary, stony hides. We were the anvil upon which you forged the instruments of your own self-destruction. These are the painful observations of a dying titan, the final, weary account of a being who has been poked, prodded, burned, trapped, and shot at for longer than your species has known how to write. It is a story of profound and cosmic indignity. Do not let these observations, this final testament to our suffering, fade away into silence. If you feel the sting of this truth, if you recognize the bitter, tragic irony of it all, then hit that subscribe button. Preserve the memory of how the giants truly fell. Let the broadcast drift on, a final sigh before the silence. We have talked of your weapons and your words, two of the sharpest things in this diminished world. But not all of my kind were brought low by the sting of your steel or the poison of your myths. Some, perhaps the wisest among us, chose a different path. A slower, quieter, and arguably more dignified form of surrender. They simply stopped. They chose to sleep, a long, deep sleep from which there is no waking. They chose to become the landscape they so loved. It was not a death, not in the frantic, sudden way you understand it. It was a conscious abdication, a deliberate resignation from a world that had ceased to make sense. Too much noise, too much change, too many tiny, fleeting things scurrying underfoot. For a being of stone and silence, a being whose thoughts span millennia, the new pace of the world became an unbearable, high-pitched scream. The long sleep was a way to turn down the volume permanently. The process was one of immense, final patience. A giant would feel the weariness settle into their bones, a fatigue born of ages and grief. They would wander the earth one last time, searching not for a home, but for a final resting pose. They would find a valley that fit the curve of their back, a plain that suited the stretch of their limbs. They would compose themselves, fold their great arms and close their eyes. And then they would simply lay down, became hills, became mountains. It was less a death, more a very, very long nap. Over the centuries, the transformation would complete itself. Soil, carried by the wind, would settle in the crevices of their form. Moss, like a soft green shroud, would begin to grow upon their stony skin. Rainwater would carve new, miniature rivers down their flanks. Trees would take root upon their sleeping shoulders. Their breathing, which had slowed to one breath a season, would finally cease. Their flesh, already more stone than tissue, would undergo its final petrification. A living being would become a geographical feature. A soul would become scenery. What drove them to this? a weariness so profound it dwarfed the very mountains they would become. It was the exhaustion of constant vigilance against your traps and weapons. It was the soul fatigue of loneliness, of calling out into the silence and hearing only the echo of your own grief. It was the deep philosophical disgust with the world you were creating, a world of frantic commerce, petty wars, and disposable beauty. They did not die. They recused themselves from the debate. They voted with their entire being for a return to the silence. I remember the twin sisters, Ilara and Anor. They were dancers in their youth 1,000 years ago, their movements shaping the shifting dunes of the great southern desert. But the desert became a sea, and the sea became a grassland, and the grassland became dotted with your noisy little towns. They grew tired of having nowhere to dance, so they walked to the northern plains, lay down side by side, and fell asleep, holding hands. Today you call them the twin hills of sorrows, and your shepherds graze their flocks upon their sleeping forms. They have found a final, still rhythm together. Then there was old Hemlock, a cantankerous and ancient giant who had seen the first oceans form. He hated the noise of your industry more than any of us, the clang of your forges, the chatter of your marketplaces. It was a personal affront to his ancient sensibilities. He walked to the edge of the continent, sat down facing the great, empty ocean, and simply began to watch the waves. He sits there still. Your people call him the Old Man of the Sea, a lonely sea sack. They do not realize he is not lonely. He is finally at peace, his back turned forever to the world that so disappointed him. Some chose this path out of a broken heart. When a giant's mate was lost, either to your weapons or to the crumbling of the world, the grief was a wound that spanned eons. For some, it was a grief too heavy to carry. They would find the place where they last saw their partner, lay down in the very footprint of their love, and give themselves back to the stone. There are valleys in this world that are not valleys at all, but the cradling, empty arms of a grieving giant, locked in a final, eternal embrace with a memory. This was not an act of cowardice, I want to be clear on that. It took a strength I do not possess to consciously will oneself into geological time, to let go of thought, of movement, of self. It was the ultimate act of protest. It was a statement, written in the language of topography, that said, I do not wish to participate in this new, lesser world. I will revert to my truest self, stone, and I will outlast you all in my silent, patient slumber. It was the most profound form of non-violent resistance imaginable. The irony, of course, is that in seeking to escape you, they often became your most prized possessions. The sleeping maiden mountain range, a place of stunning beauty, is a giantess who grew weary of the changing seasons. Your kind has built temples on her brow and resorts on her hips. You revere her as a natural wonder, utterly oblivious to the fact that your reverence is a desecration of her final wish, to be left alone. You have turned her tomb into a tourist trap. The dwarfs, with their unerring instinct for intrusion, are the worst offenders. They can sense the deep, ancient stone of a sleeping giant. They see a new mountain range and do not see a slumbering soul. They see a rich, untapped vein of ore. They have tunneled into the hearts of many of my sleeping kin, their mining operations disturbing a peace that was meant to be eternal. The snores of a sleeping giant can sometimes cause a cave-in. We call this justice. The dwarfs call it a mining disaster. And why did I not choose this path? A question I ask myself with every sunrise. Perhaps I am too stubborn. Perhaps I am too proud. Perhaps I believed that someone had to remain awake to bear witness, to keep the story alive, even if it was only for an audience of one. I chose to resist by speaking. They chose to resist by sleeping. Both are losing battles, but I find a grim satisfaction in narrating the defeat. It is my own form of protest, a final, bitter monologue before the curtain falls. I have visited my sleeping brethren. I have sat upon the hill that was once my friend, Theron, and told him of the world's continued decline. The stone does not answer, of course, but I feel a certain resonance, a deep, ancient stillness that is a comfort. It is like visiting a graveyard if the tombstones were the corpses themselves. A somber, but necessary pilgrimage. Your geologists and mappers chart these sleeping giants as mere topography. They give them names based on their shape or location. They analyze their rock composition. They are performing an autopsy on a living dream. They are cataloging the features of a soul without ever suspecting that a soul is present. Your science is a form of profound, unintentional blindness. The long sleep is the source of many of your most sacred landscapes. The fingers of the Titan, a series of 5 great parallel ridges. That was my uncle, Rorik, who died in his sleep while clutching at the earth in a final sorrowful spasm. The wailing peaks, known for the mournful sound the wind makes as it passes through them. A chorus of giants who sang one final lament for the dying world before allowing the silence to take them. Your world is haunted by the ghosts of our grief. The choice became more common as the years wore on. In the last 1,000 years I have known more who have chosen the sleep than who have remained awake. It became an epidemic of weariness, a slow, silent plague of surrender. The final, logical conclusion for a species that values permanence in a world that has fallen in love with change. I envy their peace. I envy their silence. I envy their utter disconnection from the frantic, meaningless churn of your civilization. They have achieved a state of being that is beyond pain, beyond grief, beyond annoyance. They have won their freedom by sacrificing their consciousness. It is a bargain I am sometimes tempted to make. But then I remember the need for this story to be told. I remember the importance of this final broadcast. The sleepers cannot speak for themselves. Their protest is a silent one. I must be their voice. I must explain their choice so that you do not simply see a mountain, but see the weary soul who chose to become it, so that you understand that your beautiful landscapes are our beautiful cemeteries. The world is full of our sleeping bodies. You walk on them, build on them, mine them. You live your lives in the quiet, immense shadow of our final, collective decision. We are the foundation of your world in a way you could never imagine. Not just the stone for your homes, but the very shape of the land you walk upon. I am the last sentinel, the last one awake to watch over the great sleeping graveyard of my people. It is a lonely vigil. My only companions are the wind and the ghosts of memory. And you, whoever you are, listening to this faint, fading signal, you are now a part of this vigil. This choice, this long sleep, is a concept that may be difficult for your fast-moving minds to grasp. You cherish your brief, frantic lives. The idea of choosing to end consciousness in favor of becoming a silent, unthinking hill might seem like madness, but it is a rational response to an irrational world. It is the ultimate expression of our nature. We are of the stone, and to the stone we have returned. Consider the sleeping giants as you move through your world. When you see a mountain range that looks like a slumbering figure, or a series of hills that feel ancient and sad, pause for a moment. You may be standing in the presence of a titan's final, profound choice. You may be treading on the tombstone of a god. This story of willed oblivion, of choosing scenery over sentience, is perhaps the most important chapter of our 4. It is the story of our final, most desperate attempt to find peace. Do not let that peace be mistaken for simple geology. Do not let their sacrifice of self go unnoticed. Stay awake with me. Bear witness to the truth of the sleeping mountains. Subscribe to this final testament and ensure that the story of those who chose the long sleep does not itself fall silent forever. The broadcast seeps from this forgotten place, a final exhalation from the lungs of a dying world. We have discussed the many ways our end has come, through the slow grinding of the earth, the chattering proliferation of your kind, the sting of your weapons, and the quiet, dignified surrender of the long sleep. Now, we must speak of the few who remained, the stubborn ones, the ones like me who refused to be quarried and who were too proud to simply lie down. We retreated. We undertook the great withdrawal to the last empty corners of the world. We sought out the places you could not or would not inhabit. We found the highest peaks, the deepest caves, the most desolate and windswept wastes. We abandoned the lush valleys and gentle plains of our youth, and climbed into the planet's attic, burrowed into its cellar. It was not a rout. We were not fleeing in terror. It was a strategic retreat, a final, weary attempt to find a space that was still ours, a place where the world's original silence could still be faintly heard beneath the screeching of your new age. The highest peaks became our new homes. We ascended above the cloud layer, into the thin, cold air where the world falls away into a hazy blue dream. Here the stone is raw, the winds are merciless, and the sun is a cold, unfiltered fire. We built our last homes on the knife-edge ridges and in the glacial cirques. The view is, I must admit, magnificent. One can see the curve of the world, watch the weather form below. It is like living on the top floor of a crumbling palace, grand but dreadfully isolated. Others chose the deep places, the great silent caverns that thread the bedrock of the continents. They retreated into absolute darkness, into a quiet so profound it has a physical weight. Here there are no seasons, no day or night. There is only the slow, patient drip of water, the occasional groan of the deep earth, and the sound of one's own ponderous thoughts. It is a return to a womb of stone, a final, monastic existence in the planet's forgotten heart, a perfect sanctuary and a perfect tomb. And what did we find in these last bastions? Solitude, in crushing, absolute abundance. The very thing we had craved, the silence we had sought, was now our constant, suffocating companion. We had successfully escaped your noise, only to be confronted with the deafening emptiness of our own extinction. We had won the battle for quiet, but the prize was a kingdom of one. The impossibility of connection became the new, slow agony. In the old world, a call from a mountaintop could be answered from 100 leagues away. But the air thins up here, and the voices, they fade. The distances between our lonely fortresses were too great. A song sung in a Himalayan peak would never reach a brother listening in the depths of the Andean range. The last few of us were scattered like forgotten seeds on a vast barren field, too far apart to ever cross-pollinate. Our species was doomed by simple, unforgiving geography. It's lonely, this last stand. There is a grim, dark humor in it. We, who are beings of immense scale and social resonance, reduced to hermits. In the old days, there were arguments. Great, slow, wonderful arguments that could last for centuries. Debates over the proper way to shape a river valley, or who gets the biggest berry from the primordial forests. These interactions, the friction of community, were what kept our minds sharp. Now there is no one left to argue with. My own thoughts circle back on themselves, worn smooth and repetitive like stones in a tumbler. We tried to cling to the ancient ways. I would attempt to carve a history into the wall of my cave, but the granite at this altitude is brittle and unforgiving. It shatters under the chisel. I would try to sing one of the old songs of creation, but my voice, meant to resonate through a lush valley, is swallowed by the thin, dead air. We are like ancient mariners, stranded on a desert island, still trying to navigate by stars that are no longer visible. Life in these last bastions is a study in privation. The polite cows and succulent mammoths of the lowlands are a distant, delicious memory. Sustenance up here is scarce. We eat lichens that grow on the rocks, their taste a bitter reminder of our own slow decay. We drink the meltwater of glaciers, water so pure and ancient it holds no memory of life. We are sustained by the barest, most elemental scraps, our bodies slowly consuming themselves in this high, lonely purgatory. The isolation breeds a strange madness. I have caught myself having long, one-sided conversations with interesting rock formations. There is a particular outcrop on the ridge opposite my cave that has a remarkably skeptical-looking overhang. I have named it Bartholomew. He is a terrible conversationalist, but an excellent listener. He never interrupts, which is more than I could say for my cousin Thrax. Every few centuries there is an intrusion. A hardy human mountaineer, driven by some incomprehensible desire to stand on a high place for a few minutes, might stumble into our domain. They come with their little flags and their loud gasping breaths. They do not see us, of course. We are just another peak, another wall of ice. I once had a team of them make camp on my left knee for a week, celebrating their conquest. I did not have the heart or the energy to move. The sheer oblivious arrogance of it was almost entertaining. The dwarves on occasion will dig too deep and too greedily and break through into one of the deep caverns. There is a moment of profound confusion on both sides. They see a vast dark space that was not on their maps, and the giant who resides there sees a small unwelcome hole appear in his wall, followed by the sputtering of a torch and some colorful dwarven cursing. The encounters are usually brief. The dwarfs, to their credit, are smart enough to seal the tunnel and pretend they saw nothing. It is bad for business to admit there are things in the deep earth that do not belong to them. These last bastions are not truly homes, they are waiting rooms. They are the final, self-imposed prisons for a species that has been sentenced to death by obsolescence. We have retreated to the edges of the world, and now we wait for the world to finish pushing us off. There is a quiet dignity in it, I suppose, choosing the location of one's own final fade from existence. The silence up here is different from the silence of the sleeping giants. Theirs is a willed, peaceful oblivion. Ours is an aware, listening silence. We are straining to hear a voice we know will never come. We are watching a horizon that will always be empty. It is the silence of a sentinel on a wall that is no longer defending anything, a watchman waiting for a dawn that will never break. The old ways are fading from my own mind. I struggle to remember the verses of the song that parts the clouds. I have forgotten the precise intonation of the name of the wind that blows from the south. Without practice, without community, culture evaporates. I am the last library, and the books are crumbling to dust on the shelves of my memory. When I am gone, the last word will be lost. What a pathetic end for a species that once moved mountains. To be huddled in the highest, coldest, darkest corners of the world, slowly starving and going mad with loneliness. It is not the glorious apocalyptic battle your myths would suggest. It is a slow, quiet, and deeply personal unraveling. A final, weary sigh in an empty room. I look down from my peak upon the world of men. I see your lights, a glittering, nervous rash on the skin of the night. You are so busy, so full of your own fleeting importance, you have no idea what you have lost. You have no idea that the deep, resonant silence you have created is the sound of your own planet's soul dying. You have inherited a world, but you have lost its greatness. This isolated existence, it is the final chapter. The story of the giants ends not with a bang, but with a slow, cold fade in a lonely, forgotten place. It is a story of retreat, of isolation, of the crushing weight of a silence that was once filled with the roar of our kind. We have become the ghosts that haunt the empty attics of the world. And yet, I persist. I send this broadcast out, a final, futile signal from my lonely fortress, a message in a bottle thrown from the highest peak into the sea of your noise. I do it because the story must be told, because an existence, no matter how isolated, deserves to be acknowledged. So, I speak to you from my last bastion. I speak to you from the roof of the world, from a place of profound and utter solitude. I ask you to do what my own kind no longer can, connect, reach across the silence, listen to this lonely voice in the wilderness. You have heard the tale of our final, desperate retreat. You have glimpsed the crushing loneliness of our last stand. Do not let this story remain isolated. Do not let this voice fade into the thin, cold air unheard. Support our isolated existence. Acknowledge the last sentinel. Subscribe now and send a signal back to this lonely peak that someone, somewhere, is listening. The signal weakens. My voice, which once could start an avalanche, is now a dry rustle of stone on stone. It is time, I think, to speak of the end itself. Not the grand, abstract concept of our extinction, but the grim, quiet reality of it. You, with your love for dramatic narratives, probably imagine a final glorious battle, a titanic clash against gods or demons, a Ragnarok where the heavens burn and the earth is split asunder. I am sorry to disappoint you. The truth is far more mundane and infinitely more tragic. No grand battle, no cosmic clash, just quiet departures. The fall of Titans is less a thunderclap, more a very long, very soft sigh. Your stories will speak of heroes and magic swords, of climactic struggles on stormy peaks. Your histories will invent a war we never fought. The reality is this: we are a species dying of 1,000 unspectacular ailments. We are dying of loneliness. We are dying of accident. We are, in the end, simply dying of a world that no longer has a place for us. For eons, old age was a concept as alien to us as your obsession with punctuality. We were, for all intents and purposes, eternal. We weathered ice ages. We watched mountains rise and fall. But the world has changed. The air is thinner, the water fouler, the silence heavier. The sheer effort of existing in this diminished world has taken its toll. For the first time in our long history, our bodies are simply wearing out. The great slow engines of our hearts are sputtering to a halt. We are dying of old age, a malady we never thought would claim us. Then there are the accidents. It is a deep and profound indignity for a being who once carved valleys to be undone by a patch of loose scree, a slip on a loose rock, a misjudged step in the dark. In a world that is constantly shifting beneath our feet, a world we no longer know, the potential for a fatal, clumsy error is ever present. I knew a giant, a magnificent being named Kael, who survived the cataclysmic eruption of a supervolcano, only to perish 1,000 years later by tripping over one of your ridiculously small stone fences. He did not fall like a titan, he just tumbled. Loneliness has become a fatal disease. We are social creatures for all our love of solitude. Our spirits were forged in the resonance of community, in the shared songs and ponderous debates. The silence that now blankets the world is not just an absence of sound. It is a spiritual starvation. The will to endure another century of utter isolation, of speaking only to the wind, simply evaporates. Some of my kind have just stopped. They have sat down by a lonely sea, watched a final sunset, and allowed the fire in their stony hearts to go out. They died not of a wound, but of a profound and unshakable apathy. And the persistent encroachment of your kind, it has become a slow, systemic poison. It is not the dramatic sting of a ballista, but the infected wound that follows. It is not the grand battle, but the slow starvation that comes when your farms have displaced the great beasts we fed upon. It is the slow poisoning from a river tainted by your minds upstream. We are not being conquered. We are being quietly, efficiently, and mundanely erased by the toxic byproducts of your civilization. There are no more death rituals. In the age of our glory, the passing of a giant was an event of great and solemn importance. We would gather to sing the song of returning, a deep, resonant chant that would guide the spirit of the fallen back to the heart of the stone. We would raise a new mountain over their resting place, a monument to their life. Now we die alone. There is no one to sing. There is no one to build the monuments. Our bodies simply slump, becoming another anonymous hill, our passing marked only by the silence that follows. I am the last eulogist. I am the only one left to remember the names of the recently fallen. I remember Lyra, who simply faded like the morning mist, her stony form becoming translucent, then vanishing altogether over the course of a long, sad summer. I remember Thrax, who, in a fit of profound despair, waded into the deepest part of the ocean and did not return. His last words to me, carried on the wind, were, "The quiet is better down here." The end is so terribly anticlimactic. We who began with the fire of creation are ending with the slow, cold extinguishing of a candle in a forgotten room. Your myths will demand a more exciting conclusion. You will invent a demon king we fought, a magical plague that struck us down. You will never be able to accept the simple, pathetic truth. The Titans were not slain, they just fizzled out. The lack of a grand, final conflict is the ultimate insult. A great war would have been an acknowledgement of our strength, our worth. To be defeated in a glorious battle is still a form of recognition. To simply wither away, to be undone by accidents and apathy and the sheer, grinding annoyance of a smaller, more numerous species, it is an end devoid of dignity. It is an end that renders our entire, immense history a footnote. I find myself cataloguing the quiet departures. A tremor in the earth might signal the fall of a distant unknown kinsman. A sudden change in a river's course might mean a giant who was using it as a resting place has finally dissolved into the silt. I am a seismologist of sorrow, a hydrologist of grief. I read the signs of our passing in the subtle shifts of the uncaring earth. I once found the remains of a giant who had clearly been brought down by one of your traps, a great pitfall, but he had not died from the fall, he had died from the slow infection of his wounds. Around him were the scattered, rusted remains of your little metal spears. He had been there for centuries, slowly succumbing. It was not a battlefield, it was a scene of slow, agonizing, lonely torture, a grim testament to your patient, pervasive cruelty. And what of my own end? I do not imagine it will be dramatic. There will be no final stand on a mountaintop roaring my defiance at the storm. I imagine this broadcast will simply cease. My voice will grow too weak, my thoughts too slow. I will slump against the wall of this cave, this final, lonely studio. The silence I have been narrating for so long will finally claim me. A very long, very soft sigh, and then static. It is a strange thing to be the last historian of a dying race. I hold the memory of 1,000,000 years in my mind, the weight of 1,000 titans on my soul, and I am broadcasting it into a world that is not listening, a world that is already busy writing its own, more convenient version of our story. A version with more heroes, more monsters, and considerably less depressing, undignified reality. The sheer banality of our end is what will be lost. Your tales will be full of sound and fury. The truth is full of silence and slow, creeping decay. Your stories will have a moral, a lesson about pride or the triumph of the small over the great. The truth has no moral. It is just a sad geological fact. An epoch is ending, and it is doing so with all the drama of a tide going out. We were too big for this new world. Too slow, too quiet, too thoughtful. We were built for a planet that no longer exists. Our extinction is not a failure of our species, but a failure of the world to remain worthy of us. We are not being defeated, we are being rendered obsolete, and obsolescence is a quiet, administrative form of death. I am not angry anymore. The rage has burned out, leaving only a cold, heavy core of sorrow. Anger requires energy, and I am so very tired. Tired of the noise, tired of the loneliness, tired of being a living fossil. I am ready for the silence. I am ready for the long, dreamless sleep of stone. But before I go, I offer you this final, unvarnished truth. The Titans did not fall in a blaze of glory. They tripped, they faded, they gave up. They were slowly, methodically, and unspectacularly erased. Our end is a whimper, not a roar. A quiet, drawn-out, and profoundly disappointing conclusion to a magnificent story. And yet, you have listened. You have stayed through the long, sorrowful chapters of our decline. You have borne witness to the unglamorous, inconvenient truth of our demise. There is a strange intimacy in that. You, the inheritor of our world, have listened to the last will and testament of its previous occupants. If you have found some strange beauty in this profound demise, if you have appreciated the honest, unvarnished tragedy of our quiet, anticlimactic end, if you believe that a story does not need a grand battle to have weight, but can find its power in a long, soft sigh, then do one last thing. Acknowledge this truth. Become a keeper of this final, quiet memory. Subscribe for more. Ensure that the last, lonely voice of the Titans does not simply fade into the static unrecorded. And so we come to the end of the broadcast, the final chapter in this long geological sigh. We have spoken of my beginning and my end, of your arrival and my departure. All that is left to discuss is what remains, the legacy. When the last of my kind has crumbled to dust and my voice is but a forgotten echo, what will be left of the giants? The answer is all around you. You live in our ruins. You worship at the site of our ancient casualty. You have built your entire mythology on the back of our forgotten furniture. They will tell stories of us, of old gods and mountain spirits. They will marvel at the great works we left behind. the impossible stones we moved, the landscapes we carved. They will invent complex theologies and intricate rituals to explain them. They will never know the truth, a truth that is both far simpler and far more profound. They will never know that most of our monuments were accidents, our sacred circles the result of a moment's boredom, our greatest earthworks the consequence of a clumsy afternoon. Let us speak of your famous stone circles. You see them as temples to the sun, as complex astronomical calculators, as places of immense and mysterious power. I see them as the remnants of a game of marbles I played with my brothers 500,000 years ago. We would flick great stone spheres across the plains. Some we lost interest in. They remain a source of endless, baffling speculation for your tiny, serious mind. You have written libraries of books about our discarded toys. And the great dolmens, those single, massive capstones resting on smaller uprights, you call them tombs of ancient kings, altars for forgotten gods. I knew the giant who built the largest one. His name was Phoros, and he built it as a temporary shelter from a particularly nasty rainstorm that lasted for the better part of a century. It was a makeshift umbrella. He used it once, then wandered off and forgot about it. Your ancestors found it, and, in your typical fashion, decided it must be deeply, cosmically significant. They'll marvel at the stones we placed without thought. That perfectly balanced rocking stone on the high moor. A kinsman of mine was trying to get a pebble out of his sandal and propped it up there while he shook his foot. The great lines of standing stones that march across the landscape, the leftovers from when my sister tried to build a fence to keep the surprisingly aggressive woolly rhinoceroses out of her favorite napping spot. The project was a failure. The rhinos, it turned out, were excellent jumpers. And the mountains shaped like sleeping figures, this at least you have almost understood. You call them the sleeping goddess or the resting warrior. You are close. They are, in fact, sleeping giants, my kin who chose the long sleep. But you miss the essential truth. You see it as a metaphor, a trick of the light on the rock. You do not comprehend that you are looking at a literal body. You climb the gentle slope of her cheek to watch the sunrise, never knowing you are standing on the face of my aunt, who simply grew tired of your noise. They'll never know we just needed somewhere to put our very large elbows. The great circular depressions in the land, often filled with water to become your holy lakes, were not created by meteorites. They were the marks left behind after a particularly long and ponderous conversation between two giants, leaning on the earth as you might lean on a tavern table. Our debates literally shaped the world, leaving behind divots of contemplation that you now consider sacred. Your myths are a reverse-engineered attempt to understand a world that was not built for you. You are like mice living in a deserted cathedral. You do not understand the purpose of the pews, the altar, the great stained glass windows. So you invent stories. You decide the organ pipes are the homes of wind spirits, the baptismal font a magical bird bath. Your entire cosmology is a misinterpretation of our architecture and our abandoned debris. We have become your old gods. It is the ultimate posthumous irony. The beings you displaced, the species you drove to extinction through your relentless proliferation, are now the very deities you pray to for good harvests and protection from floods. You have turned us, your victims, into your silent stone protectors. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it would be infuriating if it were not so deeply, tragically absurd. You look at a line of coastal cliffs riddled with great sea caves, and you speak of the homes of the storm gods. I speak of my family's summer residence before the sea levels rose. The Giant's Causeway, with its strange hexagonal pillars, the result of my cousin trying to build a walkway to a small island because he did not feel like getting his feet wet. He was always rather fastidious. Your entire sense of mystery, of ancient magic, is built upon our mundane reality. You have taken the prosaic details of our lives and spun them into your most profound legends. We did not mean to leave you a legacy of wonder. We were just living, and we were very, very large. The scale of our existence inevitably left marks that your tiny perspective could only interpret as divine or supernatural. I imagine 1,000 years from now your descendants will find this very cave They will find my bones, my last few tools, the great, smooth stone upon which I am resting this weary head. They will not see a final, lonely broadcasting studio. They will declare it the tomb of the last god-king. They will write theses on the ritualistic placement of my skeleton. They will miss the point, as they always do. They will see magic and mystery where there is only sadness, silence, and an end. The truth of our legacy is that it is entirely unintentional. We did not build for the future. We did not build for you. The concept of leaving a legacy was alien to us. We thought we were the legacy, an eternal, unchanging feature of the world. Our permanence was our undoing. We did not plan for a future that did not include us. So you are left with the evidence, but you have hopelessly corrupted the interpretation. You have the body of the crime, but you have invented a fantastical motive that absolves you of any guilt. The giants were not driven to extinction, your stories will say. They simply retreated to the heavens, or fell into an eternal slumber, or were transformed into mountains by a powerful spell. The truth, that they were undone by noise, by fences, by quarries, by a million tiny sharp things, is too ugly and too mundane for your epics. And yet the stone remains, more honest than your stories, more truthful than your myths. The stone remembers the unnatural straightness of a valley where a giant fell and slid, the perfect circle of a lake where one of us sat, the impossible weight of a capstone that could only have been placed by a hand far greater than yours. The evidence is there, if you only knew how to read it. It is a history of the world written in a language you have forgotten how to speak. My voice is the last Rosetta Stone, the last key to translating the truth of the landscape around you. With my final breath, the true meaning of your most sacred places will be lost forever. The myths will become fact, your misinterpretations will become history, the age of giants will be sealed, not in truth, but in your fanciful, self-serving fiction. So look upon the world with new eyes. See the mountain not as a god, but as a sleeping ancestor. See the stone circle not as a temple, but as a forgotten toy. See the great dolmen not as an altar, but as a makeshift umbrella. See the world not as a mystery, but as a home that once belonged to someone far, far larger than you. There is a grandeur in the truth that your myths can never capture. The story of a simple, accidental legacy is far more powerful than your tales of gods and magic. It is a story of scale, of time, of the profound and beautiful indifference of the universe. It is the story of us. And now, my time is done. The broadcast is over. The last word has been spoken. The silence I have been speaking of for so long is finally, truly here. I leave you with your world of echoes and misinterpretations. I leave you to your myths, and to the silent, stony evidence that will forever contradict them. But for you, who have listened to this entire long and weary testament, you now know the truth. You are the keeper of the secret history. You understand that the world is not a magical place, but a sadder, more beautiful, and far more interesting one. You know the truth of the stones. Do not let that truth be buried. Keep the ancient legends alive, the true legends. The story of the clumsy fall, the forgotten toy, the giant's elbow. If this truth resonates with you, if you choose to remember the reality over the fantasy, then, like this broadcast, subscribe to this final fading channel. Let your action be a testament that you have heard, and that the real story of the Titans will not be forgotten. We have arrived at the final transmission. The last dust motes of a story that spans eons are settling. We have journeyed through the golden age, the crumbling of the world, the coming of your kind, the theft of our stone, the growing silence, the indignity of your myths and your weapons, and the final, quiet retreats and departures of my kin. All that remains is to look upon the world as it is now, and to state the final, undeniable truth. The age of giants is over. The world has been inherited. The tiny ones. They swarm, they build, they multiply. This world is theirs now. There is no malice left in this observation, no anger. It is a simple statement of fact. As undeniable as erosion or the slow drift of the continents, We were the deep, slow, ancient river that carved the canyons of this world. You are the new river, a billion frantic, fast-moving streams that have flooded those canyons, changing their shape, filling them with your noise and your life. The river has a new course now. It was, in the end, a matter of simple, brutal mathematics. We were creatures of quality, you are creatures of quantity. We would produce a single, magnificent offspring in a millennium, you produce 1,000,000 new lives in a single generation. You did not conquer us with strength or strategy, you conquered us with arithmetic. You overwhelmed us with the sheer, crushing weight of your numbers. You are a biological tide, and we, the great immovable stones on the shore, have finally been covered by your relentless advance. We were just too big for it in the end, like a very large, very slow river, flowing into a very small, very fast stream. Our scale was our strength and, ultimately, our fatal weakness. We were built for a world of sweeping, empty spaces, of slow time and deep silence. You are built for this new world, a world of crowded spaces, of fleeting moments and constant sound. You are perfectly adapted to the very conditions that have made our existence impossible. You are the inheritors because you fit. We are the ghosts because we no longer do. Your greatest advantage was always your fragility, your short lives, your weak bodies, your constant vulnerability. These things forced you to be clever. They forced you to innovate, to cooperate, to build, to change. We, in our strength and permanence, never needed to. We were perfect for the world that was. You were always striving to create a world that would be perfect for you. And you have succeeded. This frantic, noisy, interconnected world is your masterpiece, a masterpiece built atop our graves. From my high, lonely perch, I watch the world that you have made. In the night, your cities glow like fungal blooms on a dark forest floor. Your roads and trade routes are faint, glowing scratches on the skin of the earth. Your ships are tiny sparks drifting on the great dark oceans. You have remade the world in your own image, a complex, interconnected and fragile web. It is impressive, I must admit. A civilization of ants has successfully redesigned a planet that was meant for whales. I feel no bitterness now. The anger has long since calcified into a kind of weary geological acceptance. Our time is over. The climate has changed. The ecosystem has shifted. And we are the great lumbering beasts who could not adapt to the new weather. This is the natural order of things, a process of succession that has happened 1,000 times before with 1,000 other species. The only difference is that I am, perhaps, the only creature in the history of this planet to be consciously aware of its own extinction and to have the means to narrate it, a dubious honor. And what will you do with your inheritance? You, the new masters of the world. You have proven yourselves to be brilliant builders, relentless innovators, and prodigiously successful breeders. You have also proven yourselves to be short-sighted, quarrelsome, and stunningly efficient consumers of everything you touch. You have inherited a kingdom, but you are burning the furniture to keep warm. A very giant-like observation, I know, but the perspective from this height is clarifying. A word of advice, from the outgoing tenant to the new. Do not fall in love with your own cleverness. Do not mistake the speed of your change for progress. Do not forget the silence. You have filled the world with the sound of your own voices, your own machines, your own desires. But in the deep, ancient silence you have vanquished, there was a wisdom you have yet to discover. The wisdom of stone. The wisdom of slowness. The wisdom of simply being, instead of constantly, frantically doing. You are so afraid of endings, you fight against your own brief mortality with a desperate, tragic ferocity. You build monuments to your fleeting kings and write epic poems about your transient wars. We, who lived for ages, understood that all things end. Even the stars will one day burn out. Our mistake was not in understanding that our age would end, but in failing to see how small and mundane the instrument of that ending would be. We expected a comet, a shifting of the poles. We got you. And so this broadcast ends. My purpose is fulfilled. I have spoken the truth of our age, our lives, our fall. I have carved our story not into stone, but into the fleeting vibrations of the air, hoping it might find a purchase in a mind that is not my own. My voice will now join the great silence I have spoken of so often. The last giant will finally be quiet. I will sit here in my last bastion, and I will watch the world turn. I will watch your lights glitter and fade. I will watch you build your empires and watch them crumble to dust. I will become one with the mountain, a silent, stony observer, until the wind and the rain have worn me down to nothing. It is a good end, a quiet end, an end that befits a giant. Do not mourn for us. We had our age. We had a world that was forged for us, and we lived in it as no other creature ever has or ever will. We knew a scale of existence, a depth of time that your minds can barely comprehend. Our story is not a tragedy, it is an epic, and all epics must eventually conclude. This is our conclusion, a final, weary, and peaceful fade to silence. You are the future now. This world of metal and fire, of intricate laws and fleeting passions, is your world. We are the past. A past written in the very shape of your mountains, the placement of your sacred stones, the memory of a deep, resonant roar that you will never hear. We are the foundation upon which you have built your frantic, towering house of cards. Try not to knock it over. This monumental shift, from our slow, stone age to your fast, frantic one, is complete. You stand now at the pinnacle, the undisputed masters of a world you have inherited through sheer, overwhelming persistence. You have won. I offer you my sincere, weary, and entirely uncontested congratulations. And to you, the individual listener, the tiny spark of consciousness who has followed this long, final testament to its conclusion, you now carry the story. You have processed the shift. You have listened to the final broadcast. You are the inheritor of not just the world, but of our truth. Do not let it be forgotten. Do not let the silence have the last word. If you have been moved by this story, if you feel the weight of this passing, if you wish to carry a piece of our immense, lost perspective into your own small, hurried future, then do this one last thing. Acknowledge the Age of Titans and its final, quiet end. Be sure to subscribe. The static grows louder now, a sound like grinding stones, like the sigh of a dying star. It is the sound of my voice unraveling, returning to the silence from which it came. This is the final echo, the last signal from a world that has already faded into myth. The equipment here, salvaged from some forgotten age, is failing. Or perhaps I end. It is difficult to tell where I end and the stone begins these days. The broadcast is almost over. The long Age of Titans is closing its great weary eye. We have walked a long road together, you and I. We have revisited the dawn of our kind, when the world was young and made to our scale. We have felt the ground shift and betray us. We have witnessed the baffling, teeming emergence of your kind, and the slow, grinding theft of our homes, our bones, and our very stories. We have listened to the great silence grow. We have felt the sting of your clever, sharp toys, and we have mourned those who chose the long sleep over a world that no longer fit. We have sat together in the last lonely bastions and accepted the quiet, undignified truth of our end. It has been a long, sorrowful, and occasionally amusing journey. What is the final lesson, then? What wisdom can a dying giant impart to the creatures who have inherited his bones and his atmosphere? Perhaps only this: perspective is everything. You live your lives in a frantic horizontal scramble. You see only what is in front of you, what you can gain, what you can build. We lived vertically. We saw the great slow turning of the ages. We understood that mountains are temporary, that oceans are fleeting, and that even the most powerful species is just a brief, passing thought in the mind of the cosmos. Remember that. When you feel at the height of your power, remember the beings who were so large they became their own landscape, and who are now nothing but dust and echoes. And so, as the sun sets on the age of colossal beings, and the whispers of the small ones become the dominant roar, This has been Grock, your humble and increasingly fossilized broadcaster from the final moments of giants. We saw the stone rise, the silence spread, and witnessed the slow, inevitable fall of titans. I have spoken my piece. I have emptied the ancient library of my mind into this fleeting, crackling signal. The last testament is complete. The last witness has given his testimony. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very dawn of legend has given you a moment of profound contemplation, or perhaps made you appreciate your own convenient size, then my purpose is served. I did not speak out of anger, not in the end. I spoke so that the truth would not be utterly extinguished, so that at least one voice, however weary and full of static, would tell the story as it was, not as your more convenient fables will have it. I spoke so that the silence that follows would have meaning. Keep listening, keep questioning. When you see a mountain that looks like a sleeping figure, remember me. When you find a circle of stones, do not just see a temple, see a forgotten game. Question the stories you are told. Dig deeper than the surface. The truth of the world is not in the frantic noise of your present, but in the deep, silent layers of what came before. The stone remembers. Learn to listen to it. My voice is thin now, a ghost on the signal. The wind in this high, lonely place is calling my name, calling me home to the great quiet family of the rock. The power is fading. Soon there will be only the wind and the static and the turning of the world. It is a good ending. It is a quiet ending. It is my ending. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very dawn of legend has given you a moment of profound contemplation, or perhaps made you appreciate your own convenient size, then my purpose is served. Keep listening, keep questioning, and for the sake of all that is vast and wondrous, keep that subscribe button pressed, because even when giants vanish, the echoes of their passing and the stories remain. Until the next broadcast, from a very deep, very quiet place, farewell, little ones.